Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Sean, last week you mentioned that you enjoy getting an hour more of sleep during this time of year, even if it's just one day.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with that. But I was in Dallas for Ride a Taxi Dallas a couple weeks ago. And we were coming back after a very successful ride. It was awesome. We had like 300 people and raised $175,000. So it was really awesome.
Sure.
So we're coming back on Sunday. The ride was on Saturday. We're exhausted. Our flight leaves at 7:30 a.m. from Dallas-Fort Worth. And we're probably a good 35 minutes away.
Sure.
So I was going to get up at 4:30 a.m. to make sure, we got to return the rental car and just make sure we're there on time. Yeah, right. It's huge.
Yeah.
So last year, my alarm didn't go off when we were leaving for the airport. So I set my alarm on my phone. Okay, my phone was not charged, and there was no USB right next to the bed. So I had to put...
What hotel did you stay
Yeah,
at?
I know. Yeah. The only USB was by the desk, which was across the room. So
Sure.
I plugged my phone in over there, and I set the alarm for 4:30, and then I also called to get a wake-up call for 4:30 a.m.
Of course.
So the phone rings to wake me up. I get up right away, and I'm like, all right, 4:30, sweet. I'm glad I got up.
Here we go.
I go across the room, and I grab my phone. Right, I'm just jolted awake from the phone. So I go over there, and I check the time. It's 3:30 a.m. The wake-up call didn't switch over the time change, and it woke me up an hour early. So I was like, all right, I could go back to bed, but I would probably be laying there wide awake, or I would just be getting to sleep when I would need to get up again, right? So I got up, and it was great. It was fine. I was nice and early to meet everybody else, to get in the car, and but
Makes
anyway.
up for last year movie. That's unfortunate. And way too early. Why do you guys do that to yourselves? You have all day to fly home Sunday, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard when you're going west to east.
Sure.
Because the time zones are not working for you.
Right.
And so it's either really early or really late. And the better of two evils. Yeah.
Well, hey, while you were flying at the butt crack of dawn, I also flew to visit my mom for a couple nights. And I think for the first time ever, I left my phone on the plane.
Oh, geez.
As I was departing. Didn't even realize it until 3 hours later when we're 75 miles away at Mom's house, right? She lives about an hour and 20 or so from the airport. So we have friends pick us up late night. I thought I put my phone in my little carrier bag for the walker, which I detach when I get on the plane and then put it back, So I grab the little net bag, get up, walk away. And then my walker comes out, I put it back together and move on. And my mom, she was on the same flight. She had gone ahead to grab our luggage because we had friends picking us up, and it was pretty late at night. So we were trying to save a little bit of time. So I was kind of in a hurry, put it back together, and head down to the luggage rack. And then we're ready, so I don't stop. We just keep moving, go to the parking lot to meet our ride. So I load my walker in the back of their 4Runner, and as I'm getting in the seat of the car, I feel around. Oh shoot, my phone's not in my pocket, but I assume it's in my walker.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, it's an hour drive, hour and a half. It's rude to play on your phone, so it's fine. I don't need it. We get home, we get settled. I don't have my phone.
Oh God.
And I'm like, oh no, it's on the plane. I just knew immediately.
You're right.
I walked away. So anyway, that was a fun couple days.
Well, and those things are the worst because not only is it really inconvenient, like complete pain in the butt, but you're beating yourself up. You're like, how could I do that? Like, that's the dumbest thing ever. Yeah.
And we're so attached to our phones that that's a hard question to answer. How does anybody just leave their phone behind? It's mind-blowing to me. So anyway, got the phone back. All is good. Back in business, but kind of intense.
So you got the actual one back. You didn't just like buy another one.
Both. It was. So I activated or began the insurance replacement.
Mm.
And then I did get my phone back, but it was after I had, began the process for a replacement, which really threw a wrench in the entire process.
Yeah. I would give you crap about this, but I've lost my wallet, my phone, my ID so many times that, I'm going to stay away from that one.
Yeah, fair. We'll just move right on. We've got a long episode anyway, so we should probably jump right into it. In honor of National Family Caregivers Month, we're honoring those who give care around the clock while also managing everything else in life, which often includes a career, other members of the family like siblings or children, chauffeuring everybody in the family, running errands, battling insurance, doctors, and so on, managing likely their own marriage or relationships, and so much more. While family should be celebrated every day, the month of November is a concentrated time to highlight the incredible impact family has on those that need care, whether due to aging, disability, injury, or anything. Family keeps life moving. That leads me to my quote for this week. It's by Michael J. Fox, and it goes like this. Family is not an important thing. It's everything.
Wow.
And that can be said about anything, anytime. Not just caregiving, but the folks that help you move when it's time to move. The folks that lend you some cash when you're struggling. The folks that just call and say, I love you. It's everything. Family is not an important thing. It's everything. Again, by Michael J. Fox, and that is the quote of the week.
Our guests today are not strangers to either this show or the Rare Disease community. Both are incredible advocates who work hard to move the needle for their own families while also impacting the future for all of us. We're honored to call them friends and privileged to work alongside them in our rare disease journeys. They're always fun to talk with, and we trust that you'll enjoy our conversation with Effie and Daniel.
Another conversation we've been looking forward to having and sharing with listeners. A lot of people that follow us know Daniel DeFabio from the Disorder channel and Global Genes. And then, of course, a million people that follow us know Effie Parks, the host of Once Upon a Gene podcast, also working with Global Genes. So, Effie and Daniel, welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Thank you.
Hey guys, so happy to be here. I feel like I say each one of your guys' names at least once a week.
Hey, really?
Yeah,
mainly you're cursing Sean's name, right?
Clearly. I'm always texting someone about him.
So I know our listeners are familiar with Effie. We've had you on the show multiple times. So I'm going to kick it off with Daniel first. Daniel, can you give our listeners a snapshot of who you are? Tell us a little bit about you. Of course, you've been on some episodes as well, but maybe go into a little more detail as to what your connection is to the rare disease community.
Yeah, absolutely. When my son Lucas was born, he was our first child. We were in the hospital for a while with him, and eventually means a year later, we discovered there was a need for a diagnosis, and that diagnosis was Menkes syndrome, which means his ATP7A gene isn't producing the protein in enough quantity to deliver copper throughout the body. And then, you suddenly get a crash course in what all that science is. And all of us, if we are in typical health, have enough copper in our diet to grow our muscle, hair, and brain, but Lucas didn't, or he couldn't metabolize what copper there was. So that put me, like any of us in rare disease, we probably weren't too concerned with it until it came to our home. So that put me into this world, and there's a lot of struggles that go with that and challenges that go with that, but it also has the silver lining of meeting these most amazing people. And it's pretty powerful to be in this one of four people in a group with 3 rare disease podcast superstars. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. Talk to us a little bit about the Disorder channel.
Yeah, one of the first things I did to figure out my own feelings about what was happening with Lucas was to tell his story first in a blog and then in a film. And once you make a film like that, you have to figure out how you're going to get people to see it. So when I met Bo Bigelow at Global Genes, we eventually had enough conversations along those lines to land on we should start a film festival. So we did the Rare Disease Disorder, the Rare Disease Film Festival. And then as we were planning to do our 3rd edition, COVID came along and changed our plans. So we looked for the at-home solution, and that became the Disorder channel, which is streaming. If you have Roku or Fire TV, it's free. You can just add it the way you would add something like Hulu or Netflix. So I encourage people to do that. We have over 200 different films and videos on rare disease stories. Kyle's in there in one called Beyond Limits on mental health. And Effie's in a bunch because she was good enough to let us do the TV version of Once Upon a Gene. So there's a lot of good stuff in there.
All right, Effie, you're up.
Thank you so much. So my name's Effie Parks. I live in Seattle, Washington with my husband, Casey, and my 2 kids, Ford and Ezzy. Ford is a 7-year-old wild little boy. He was born with a neurodevelopmental disorder called CTNNB1. And like many of those disorders, he's not creating a protein that has a lot of jobs that involve his cells. So everything from the creation to the adhering to the reproduction to the cell life. So it affects all aspects of his development and growth. He had a pretty rough first 5.5 years, at least, I would say, trying to get his bearings, and get used to his body. He uses a wheelchair. He's mostly nonverbal, although he's picked up some words in the last year, which is so cool.
Yeah,
he's fed by a feeding tube and has a movement disorder, which I know both of you know a lot about. So I think right now we're in this amazing little stretch that's been great because he kind of simultaneously got stronger and also his brain is doing something. So I think all those power combined right now are pretty cool to watch. So we're kind of seeing him have some liftoff in his verbal skills, and also in, just keeping his food down and maneuvering himself around in his chair. So we're definitely savoring this nice stretch that we're having. And like Daniel, that entry hood into becoming a new parent to a child who is sick is extremely isolating, and you live in uncertainty forever, right? And it's a really, really difficult place to be, especially in the beginning. And so one of the ways to survive, and not just survive, but to eventually thrive, like we are here now together, is to tell that story and to find those people wherever they are. And everyone knows my story with you guys, and that you like literally saved my life. I was like, oh my God, I found them. I found the people who are talking about rare disease. And guess what? They're even happy sometimes, and they're not miserable people, and everything isn't awful. And you guys just really brought a ray of light and hope into my world.
Oh, that's very kind.
I do want to ask you about the healthy babies. Daniel, you mentioned your son was the first of 3?
For us, he's the first of 2 children. So his
First
younger
of 2.
brother, 2 years younger, is in more typical health. No rare disease. Yeah.
And then Effie, you mentioned Ezzy. How old is she? And as far as you know, typically healthy?
Yep. Ezzy's 4 years old, and very different experience raising her, right? She's been on mark, if not sooner than probably typically developing kids. It's been everything I imagined that it would be like.
I wanted to ask about Ford. You said that you guys were on a really good stretch, and is there a specific reason, or is it just like persistence and like years of because I know you do so much therapy and all the things that you guys do, is it just building to something, or is there a specific reason why right now it's better than it's ever been?
I think, time and just getting bigger, especially with like his tone, has made his like lung situation stronger, so when he's sick now, he's not as sick as normal, and he's not hospitalized every time. So I think he's building up just that muscle tone to be able to like cough better,
Right.
So there's that aspect. And then another thing that I swear by, and I'm not giving medical advice, but I do know about 100 parents that just got on this med now. One of the meds that we give Ford for his movement disorder, we upped about a year and a half ago. And 2 weeks after we upped that med, Ford started babbling. And the only word he had ever said before that was dada. So some med clicked something too, and like helped with the muscles in his mouth and his throat that gave him a voice, right? So that's been very cool. And I think that's also helped him get what he wants sooner than later. And so it's helped him want to achieve things physically and stuff, because he can now kind of tell us sort of what he wants a little better than us asking 1,000 yes or no questions a day.
Right.
So I think all that. And then, of course, the therapies and stuff that he does, and school, that social stuff is so powerful for these kids and their development. So who knows what it is, but I think it's a little bit of everything from all.
Right.
About a year and a half ago is when things started to. I think it was about a year and a half ago that he met me. So I wonder if that.
Yeah, you get the credit. Yep.
It was totally. Yeah,
That's what
it was that ride home. It was that ride home for sure.
I had the privilege on Casey and your husband, Ford's dad. They were driving home from Southern California back up to the Seattle area. Of course, drive right through Sacramento. That's why I somehow convinced your husband to pull over and meet a stranger for, I don't know, an hour and a half or 2 of coffee. So
hardly a stranger.
Definitely a privilege.
I have the cutest picture of you and Ford from that day.
Great. So part of the reason we're having you guys on today is a few months ago, Kyle and I were a part of a panel discussion at Bio International. And this is where Daniel had really championed the thought of the importance of the caregiver's voice, especially in the rare disease world, where you have people that maybe can't talk And then, of course, if anybody follows Effie on social media, she's incredibly active. In your social medias, you've talked about the importance of the moms and dads and aunts and uncles and people stepping up and talking on behalf of the individuals that can't talk for themselves. So today's conversation is all about the value and the absolute importance of the caregiver's voice in caring, in medicine, in physical therapy, and all the things involved in helping enhance the quality of life for a patient or for an individual. I don't know who to go to first.
I want to go first.
Yeah, Daniel.
When you mentioned that bio panel, which the title was something like the patient voice, and as we were about to begin speaking, or on the stage, I get a text from Effie basically saying, "Don't you dare forget to include caregiver voice, not just patient voice." And it's such an important point and a distinction to be made, because so often, I think, as bio intended, and I know Global Genes has done, we use patient voice as this umbrella that might be shorthand for patient and caregiver voice,
Right.
but it's a little bit not good enough to, whenever you don't mention someone specifically, it leaves too much room for misunderstanding. And I think that's what Effie's really great at, is making that distinction and saying, hey, caregivers too. And why is it different? If you have a patient voice, why do you also need a caregiver voice? Well, one of the big reasons is kids like ours, Effie's son Ford, my son Lucas, that literally don't have much of a voice, meaning the ability to communicate. And I don't just mean verbally. My son couldn't do the eye gaze. He couldn't do the yes, no choices. So we had real communication challenges, and I'm glad Effie's getting a little more progress with Ford, but it's still a huge challenge. So you are the caregiver, yes, but in some cases, in a lot of cases in rare disease, you are kind of the one and only voice, or you and your spouse are the two voices. And so if we talk about adult patients, that's very understandable that you guys should be your own voice, of course. But pediatric patients up to a certain age, they've got to go with their parents' voice. But pediatric patients that literally don't have much communication, again, it's got to be the caregiver's voice. And that's not always, it may be implied, it may be intended, but it's not always stated. And if you look at whatever it is, a clinical trial or a research survey, they may be welcoming the caregiver, but sometimes almost as an afterthought. And you can see it in the surveys sometimes. It's like, wait, am I answering this for me, or am I answering this for my child? And it's not always structured like it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of really put a pin in that and how important it is to distinguish that. And every time online when I see the patient voice, I'm always going and following up with some housekeeping, and I add that caregiver voice because, like Daniel said, not only are most of these rare disease kids nonverbal and have intellectual disability, but there's a huge percentage of these kids who pass away before they're 5. And the rest of them, we are taking care of for the rest of our lives. So the caregiver voice, it isn't just like a side piece to that, it's not just an adjunct. It's really a central part of this whole conversation, and it deserves equal consideration around it. And so I really do want to have that always together. And especially when pharma and industry are talking about it, I want them to use those two words, because the caregivers are raising their children. They're doing the doctors, they are doing the school, they are managing the meds, they are raising the money, they're doing all of the things also while caring for everyone else and themselves. And you guys know that, right? As patients yourself. So these worlds are living the same life. And there is such a critical piece to the caregiver having that voice, because we're the ones doing everything in those doctor's appointments and making those medical decisions.
I like the way you guys put it, because I mean, even in my experience or in our experience, it obviously is not the same, but it's the whole family, it's the whole community. It's not just the patient, right? And like, all right, patient voice might that term might fit better for people like me and Sean, or adults with rare disease. but it's always the whole family who's diagnosed. You know, when I say we were diagnosed, I intentionally use the word we because it wasn't just me. It was all of us together that are really affected by this. And obviously in your case, and in many parents' cases, a lot more acutely, but it's still a very similar concept for everyone, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. A holistic perspective. I love that. It is a family system, and it's a lifelong commitment for everyone involved.
If I can add, sort of underlining the importance of using the right terms for the right people, and making sure they feel seen and included. When I recruited Effie to come work at Global Genes, the first few meetings was all patient, rare patient, rare patient, and after those meetings were over, she privately said to me, "Wait a minute. Nobody has been talking about the caregiver at all. Maybe this isn't going to be a great fit for me here." I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. When we say patient, we mean patient and caregiver."
Yeah.
But it goes to show, like, so many times you think, oh, it goes without saying. Well, maybe it doesn't go without saying. Maybe you need to say it explicitly.
Yeah, and there's a piece to that caregiver hat too, where it is very different of people who are caring for adults, like the regular caregivers that are caring for adults, and then parent caregivers that are caring and doing all those jobs, but also not getting the qualification technically as a caregiver or the pay or the assistance. Whereas if it's an adult, they will sort of have more resources because it's a known like profession, and it's more accepted and normal for adults to have caregivers and for adults to be caregivers than it is to think of the parent as that profession also. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. When you think of being a caregiver, do you think it interferes with your ability, or do you have to focus on like being a mom, like being Ford's mom? Like you have several roles, and do they overlap? Do they compete at times? What do you think about that? Like, does mom and caregiver come in a conflict sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember what my friend Ryan Sheedy said about how it's different to be a parent and it's different to be a caregiver. And I think too, Daniel, you can probably add to this, is when you actually have to go into on mode or ice mode or whatever to get the job done, whether it's in the hospital or, during a tough procedure. Like you have to have like this total mindset shift and personality shift sometimes to either be more direct or whatever like that. But does it bleed into everything? Absolutely. Because again, the difference between a professional caregiver, they're not going and calling in the meds and picking up the meds and arranging, all of these things just to get those little things done that are huge when you're doing it all yourself. But the parent is doing all of that stuff, not a caregiver. The caregiver's coming over, providing the care and leaving. And the parent is doing absolutely every breath of that day.
Yeah. I definitely do think the two bleed over into each other and sort of contaminate each other, if you want to think of it that way. It was hard for me to, maybe it was from Ryan Sheedy also, but I didn't really learn the distinction that you're doing two jobs. You're doing a parenting job and you're doing a caregiving job until a couple of years ago when it was essentially too late. I still think we probably did the best we could, but
Absolutely.
Between the moments of caregiving, in our case, was very little time. We'd have typically a stretch of 3 hours that didn't need any procedures, any, sort of medical care attention for Lucas. And so you think about, what are you going to do in those 3 hours? Are you going to quick switch to parent mode and have fun with your kid? Are you going to switch to career mode and get some work done? It was a tough balancing act for sure, because everything caregiver is so urgent and everything parent is so maybe flexible and maybe you can put it off. And when I was trying not to compare, and I think anybody in our space has probably already heard comparison is the thief of joy, but we're human, so it's hard not to compare. But I would look at the needs we had, the care needs, like going to a therapy, right? And I sort of try to be generous and compare it to my friends with typical health kids and say, well, me taking Lucas to swim therapy is no different than them taking their kid to ballet or baseball. Well, it is different because if they blow off ballet or baseball, it's not that big a deal. And if we blow off therapy, maybe it is pretty big deal. So the the tug of war between parenting and caregiving probably for most people always falls more heavily on the urgent needs of caregiving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the time parents literally forget that parenting aspect, and or they feel bad when they're being a parent because they feel like they're taking important, valuable like therapy time away from their kid or not doing enough for their kid. And they forget that they can even quit that for a while and just be a parent, right? Because everyone in your world, the doctors, the therapists, all those people are telling you that this is the most important thing and you have to do it. And otherwise, what if your kid doesn't do this one day? It's because you decided to read a book instead.
Yeah. And the very much related aspect of that is when you have other kids, and there's whole conversations dedicated to the sibling experience, right? But I think or maybe I can just speak for myself, a little bit shortchange the healthy kid because their needs again aren't so emergent, right? They're more typical needs like, hey, I want to play. You're like, well, I can't play. I'm busy doing this other stuff. And I again hope we did a pretty good job of balancing between what one son needed and what the other son needed. But it's a tough thing to balance.
Totally. I think I told you this, Daniel, but I think for about at least the last 6 months, one of my practices has been to not say, oh, hold on, Ezzy, I'm helping Ford. Because I saw that I was saying that at least 20 times a day when she'd be like, Mom, I'd be like, hold on, I'm giving Ford his med. Hold on, I'm feeding him. Hold on, I'm picking him up. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen to Ezzy if all she ever hears is, hold on, I'm helping Ford?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it was on the tip of my tongue sometimes to say to Alex, can't you see? And I'm very grateful that I had the presence of mind to never say that out loud. But did that attitude come across? Unfortunately, it probably did,
For sure. But, I know I've probably said that to Ezzy, like cleaning up something and her wanting something. I'm sure I said, can't you see I'm helping Ford right now? I know I've said that.
Yeah.
It seemed like an impossible situation, right? And you just do the best you can, I guess, right? I mean, you guys are doing amazing and helping other people figure this out too and think through all this stuff. Like, I don't know, I just think it's awesome to talk about these things because they're definitely eating at so many people. But when we put them on the table, I think it takes the power away from like eating away at us.
Totally, Kyle. I think we all know that like in our cores, which is why we all do what we do, is that when you can talk about it and laugh about it and whatever with people like us who get it, that it does take a lot of that power away from it. Even just momentarily is enough sometimes.
Yeah.
Speaking of, Daniel, you've said it a few times. We hope we did our best, and I'm sure you did. Don't doubt that whatsoever. And I'm sure Ezzy's a beautiful girl, and she's going to be just fine, emotionally and mentally. But take yourselves back. 7 years for Ford. I'm not sure how many years for Lucas, but if you were to put yourself in their shoes where it's just starting, talk to that new family for a minute. How would you encourage them to either separate the caregiver from being a mom or dad, or how would you encourage realizing that there's importance in both roles? Like, how would you, I don't know, just encourage people for a minute that maybe are in those early stages of where you've been?
For me, I think, and I actually did this, maybe I didn't do it soon enough, but writing down a list of what the caregiver duties were as if I was going to give it to someone else, right? In case somebody comes over to do them for me, which was wishful thinking. But, but having that was the purpose of the document in my mind, right? But having that, all of a sudden it was laid out in black and white, like, wow. And that's how I know what to tell you. We had a 3-hour window at most that was not medically scheduled time, right? And once that is laid out clearly, you can process it more and you can share it with others too. Like, this is why I'm having a hard time. I have this much time to do this many things. Or if you don't, you sort of formalize it and crystallize it. You just think, I'm doing what needs to be done as it needs to be done, right? And that, I think, leads to the overwhelm, that it's a never-ending task. It feels like an impossible task, and you take on more and more as you can, but then maybe you burn yourself out. So not that it would make it any easier to have it on paper, but it makes you think about it a little more clearly.
Yep, I love that. I'm going to say 1, download the Two Disabled Dudes, download the Disorder Channel, download Once Upon a Gene, because those passive friendships that you get and that you can consume at your own pace, especially when you're in the thick of it, will change your life. And they're having conversations that are going to give you ideas, that are going to make you feel seen, that are going to make you laugh, that are going to make you cry. You're going to feel connected to someone when you feel more disconnected than you ever thought possible. And then I would also say you have to just make the decision to get over being able to ask for help, but especially being able to accept help. And you're also going to have to get over the fact that not everyone's going to help you with your kid the same way you would do it. And you just have to let it be done. Because like Daniel said, that burnout is highly volatile in so many ways, and it affects your whole family. And so you have to figure out how people can help you. Write that in the list, right? Write the list of all the things that you would need and just hand the paper to the people and they can pick their own adventure for it. But then you have to let them. And then you also have to remember that when people help you, they're not going home and going, oh my God, I totally had to help Sean find his phone. It was such a burden today. They're going to be so excited that they got to help you find your phone. And so you have to just open that up, because you cannot do this alone, mentally or physically.
Ooh, that's good words.
Yeah. And speaking of not doing it alone, I think I, of course, endorse Effie's media recommendations, but those are media, your podcast, Effie's podcast, anything on our channel, those are good in and of themselves, but they're also good because they are a way of finding your people. And maybe you're only finding them as a voice in your ear, which is great, but maybe you're also, as it's the way I met you guys, the way I met Effie, you moved on from being voices in my ear to being people that I actually know in the real world. And maybe not everyone will do that through a podcast, but find your people, whether it's a Facebook group or whatever, makes all the difference, because some people can relate to what we're dealing with and some people can't. And some people can come around to learning and some people will maybe choose not to. But when you have the right people, you won't feel as alone. You'll get better advice. You'll find better solutions. It's the beginning of everything, I think. So if you don't know where to find them, maybe ask me or you guys or Effie. We can point you.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. All that.
It is the beginning of everything. I like that.
Let's go back to the caregiver voice aspect of things, because for a long time we've heard the importance of including the patient voice in everything. And you've alluded to, Daniel, it's probably always been intended, to include the patients and caregiver. But Effie, I'm curious, just from this conversation, you seem to be a little bit more passionate about making sure those two words are used. Can you think of anything, and I'm putting you on the spot, was there a moment or a scenario where that clicked differently for you?
I think it's just been my experience, traveling through these conferences or, watching them virtually, but hearing the speak from people I know in industry, especially, and pharma especially. And it's not that they don't care. They just really didn't know. Right.
Sure.
And I think that's what we have to do, is teach people in this world, especially. We know that. And so I just kind of saw that this pattern existed. And like Daniel said, it means both of us. I realized that especially in that form of stakeholders, it didn't mean both of us all the time. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like if we want to be inclusive around language, we have to really be better at identifying this stuff for the people who are helping us make really big decisions and who are helping to fund things, because individuals who don't have a voice, these voiceless people who we are voices for, they're not necessarily getting the boxes checked in the way that they should, because there aren't patients old enough or that can speak or who don't have intellectual disabilities who can actually speak on that aspect of the patient voice. And so it just seemed like a lot of stuff was kind of missing.
Yeah, that makes sense. There comes a time where you've got to be intentional about some things, even if it's just language.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the disconnect is that research and pharma come to this with their end goal is let's get our drug or treatment to a patient. And that's a checkbox. We need a patient. And they may not have thought through. And of course, as soon as you bring it to their attention, they need to address this. They need to accept this, but they may not have thought through, does that patient have the ability to act on his or her own? Or do they need a caregiver or a parent or someone to act with them and for them? And that should be part of the conversation too. We were fortunate to be in a clinical trial. It had this unfortunate aspect of travel to Washington, D.C., and they included one caregiver, one, the patient and one parent. And it was possible to do it that way. But really, if you had included the caregiver voice early in your clinical trial design, we would have said, we kind of need to travel, all three of us. We need two people to take care of one kid when we're traveling. And, that just wasn't part of their design, but maybe it could have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's why these conversations are so important, because you don't know what you don't know. And if none of us have the time to talk about it or to stick up, this flag that, things are going to get made that nobody has to get made.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to switch gears just a little bit here again. And preparing for this conversation today, there was, texts and emails going back and forth. And one of the things mentioned was the phrase special needs kids. And is it okay to use? When is it okay to use? How's it okay to use? And so on. So let's take a few minutes here and just hash that out. My gut reaction. And actually, Kyle, what's your gut reaction to the phrase special needs kids? Is it okay? Not okay? And is there a certain point where it shouldn't be used, given age or ability?
First of all, Sean, thanks for putting me on the spot. Now I have to. I think it's just like every other term. It seems very utilitarian. It's there to make a distinction, right? Like, I don't know. In my mind, it sounds a little more complicated, but I would tend to say a kid who has special needs. But I realize that's not the most practical way to use it, And so I really do. I've come around to sort of people first type language, and maybe it's depends on who's using that term. Like, obviously, the terms might be different between Daniel and Effie than they are between Sean and Daniel, or what, or somebody even outside the rare disease community altogether. So I think it's a good topic. And I don't think I have all the answers.
I think it's hard to have all the answers. I think the terms keep shifting in their intent and their meaning, and even the ones that have the best definition and the best intention, they can pick up a little stigma as they go, and then we want to move away from that because now it's got this stigma. I hope that special needs kids came out of maybe the context of, in the classroom, this kid needs something special, right? But then where does that leave us, right, when the kids are no longer school age? And I think, sure enough, you don't talk about special needs adults as much. I don't think that's a term. I don't think people say that. And I will always, go to the person most effective should be the person to decide how to be referred, right? So you guys tell me I am a person who relies on a mobility device. That's the terminology you should use. Okay, then I'll go with that. I won't, maybe for Lucas, I might have said wheelchair kid, which might have been dismissive or maybe not the best term. Sure. But where it gets weird, again, is this ability of the most directly affected person, Ford or Lucas or kids like them, can't tell us what term they like the most. So the parents are deciding on a term. And are we doing it because it's easy and fast and special needs just covers it? Or have we really thought through the best language? I don't know. There's a lot there. I mean, I think I don't know that we can ever land on great terms that are as specific as they need to be without being super long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
I feel like maybe a lot of it is either the context or like intent. Like, okay, intent is interpretation, but a lot of times it's not hard to interpret what the intent
tone
is, right?
or what the look on the faces. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we're talking about this because I think I messaged you like a few months ago about talking about this, if we could. I'm going to try not to like get on my giant soapbox about this and just give some of my really important thoughts on the matter. Daniel's absolutely right. Language evolves, which is very cool. And I think that everyone should have their own power of identifying, right? And it gets complicated when, again, that caregiver is the one who speaks for the child, because not only can they not speak, but they also have intellectual disability. So the issue that I've been seeing, especially in social media, is there are now parents, caregivers, who shame other caregivers for using the word special needs because they've been told by disabled adults that disabled adults don't like that term. Okay, I say those disabled adults can speak, and those disabled adults don't have disability or intellectual disability. That's them. This is a little different. This is also where the parent gets to come up to that table and scoot in on a chair because this has more of a dynamic to it. And again, they're going to be speaking for this child forever. When I first started, I never used the term special needs, not because it was bad, but because I had met you guys. And so I just identified Ford as my little disabled dude. And I never even hashtagged it until I started seeing this rumbling online of parents going back and forth at each other for using this term. And then being in the community and speaking to thousands of families, the parents who use the term special needs are the most amazing types of parents that you can imagine, and it's a descriptive, soft landing. It's what everyone around them knows the answer to when they say it, and they don't have to explain it. Maybe it's more cozy when the child is a baby and even smaller to say that than disabled. I mean, they're coming into this world too, usually without any knowledge. And I think that if a family needs that warmer hug and doesn't want to have to explain themselves around everyone to dig into that answer, that if that's the term that they use and that's what their family, conveys it as, then we should respect that, because I don't feel like it's derogatory. And I don't think that everyone gets to speak for an entire group of people. And that, especially if your intention is appropriate, I don't think we should be shaming stuff over something like this because we have bigger fish to fry. And again, the people who use this term are the nicest angels on earth, and they are not being evil, and they're not being dismissive and trying to cover the mouths of what the disability community wants and declares. I think it's more complex, and that we just need to respect how everyone wants to identify and let them use their terms. And if you are questioning it, ask them how they want to be referred to as. I think that's pretty much the biggest part of it for me is just the divisiveness that's happening, and that not one person gets to make up the language for this very vast group of us.
Yeah, I think you make a good point in just asking people what they prefer, what works well for them. We released an interview a week or two ago with the staff writer, USA Today, Zach Victor. And when he interviewed me, he asked at the end of the interview, would you prefer when I write about you, I say something to the effect of person first or disability first? And to me, I don't have a preference. I don't care. I'm not offended. You can call me what you want. You can say it how you want. But I found there's some value and I have a lot of respect for Zach and other people who just ask, hey, what do you like? What works better for you?
Yeah, I'm also someone who doesn't care. I would never correct someone if they said Ford has special needs. I'd just let it fly in one out there and out the other. I don't care. And I did since start actually hashtagging all of my stuff with special needs, because what I realized was that an entire group of people, the people who use that term, I had never reached because they only use that term. And so there were people who weren't necessarily getting access to this resource because I wasn't using their language.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I'm glad you made that point too, Effie, because with any of these language choices, they're imperfect, they're imprecise, but maybe the strength and the weakness of special needs is how broad it is, right? So if I were to say Lucas is disabled, that sounds like physically disabled, which was true, but there was an intellectual disability too. And that doesn't really get implied when I say disabled. So special needs is so big and broad, and yet it lets people bring to it what they think. Like, oh, do you mean something like autism? Yeah, something like autism. Not exactly that.
Sure.
But it lets people in a bit more. And I think that's why Effie found it can be the broadest audience that includes rare disease and includes disabilities. And again, it maybe isn't the greatest term, but it's a pretty broad, general, easy to understand term. I never love it when there's not a great term, and I don't feel like I'm using the best one, but
well, and I wonder too if maybe there's so much sort of heat behind it in the people who don't want you to use it. Can you imagine the difference of of a childhood? I know you guys had FA come on a little later, but if you grew up and you had a typically developing brain and you were disabled in whatever form 30, 40, 50 years ago, their childhood had to have been extremely different than the childhood our disabled kids are living now. So it probably was a lot more horrific in lots of ways. And so maybe there's some of that trauma, I don't know, if lack of a better word, that's attached to that so deeply, because their experience being a disabled kid that long ago is so different than it is now. It's not perfect now still, but I guarantee you it's better than it was for them.
Anything else we want to be sure to touch on or bring up?
I'll just mention, because I was listening to your episode with Matt LaFleur, and you talked about the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell and stuff. And it occurred to me, you guys probably know this, like so many of those hero stories, whether it's Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker or Peter Parker or a Disney princess, they're almost always orphans, or they don't have both parents, right? And since we're talking about the caregiver experience, I was thinking about, is the hero's journey story, it should be, in my case, it should be Lucas's story, but it's usually as told by me, his dad. And Ford's story is usually as told by Effie. And so that's a different dynamic right there. Some rare disease kids might not have both parents, but Ford and Lucas did. But I think more than not being an orphan in this story archetype mythos thing, they are the opposite of orphan. They are the overparented child, the extra parented. If we go back to the you're not just a parent, you're also a caregiver, right? So they're hopefully it's not smothering, but it's something like that, right? It's this overdose of parenting on these children. So I don't know that how exactly that maps into the Joseph Campbell model, other than maybe they don't get to verbally usually tell their own story. But it just occurred to me as this interesting thing that was because we were in the space where they call them orphan drugs. The diseases were not prevalent enough to be attractive to the drug companies, so drug companies didn't pay attention until somewhat recently. It's gotten better. But anyway, it just struck me that there's a bit of a different parenting model at play there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the caregiver's narrative is so interwoven with that of the patient voice, and I think that they both just really enrich each other and kind of help explain it more.
Yeah, there's got to be a Venn diagram.
Yeah, there's got to be. Someone needs to make that.
Those two overlap. Like you guys understand your kids so much that you speaking for them is almost like, I don't know, at some level there's one voice or something, right? I don't know. How do you make the distinction between yours, Effie, and Ford's voice, or your voice, Daniel, and Luke's voice?
Well, I think there is this superpower that you gain. I mean, you can literally look at your child and like get the telepathy coming back because you can see the facial expression and you know what that means. Whether it's I'm about to throw up or something hurts or whatever, like you literally can speak nonverbal language. And you can also do that with other kids. Like if I had ever been blessed enough to be in person and meet Lucas, I could have had a conversation with Lucas. I am certain of it. Like you can meet other types of people out in the world, in the wild, and you have this form of communication that you didn't necessarily have before. And you've gotten really aware of nonverbal cues and even just that perfect, relaxing feeling of being so comfortable in that situation that would have made you so terrified had you never been there. And I think you're just so much more comfortable in normally uncomfortable encounters.
Yeah, comfortable option wasn't really there for us. So
yeah. I think you're just bolder, and your threshold for awkwardness is just not really. Yeah.
Yep. Well, guys, I am so grateful that A, we know you, and B, you're willing to continue allowing us to be a part of your journey and being on ours. Thank you for being on the show today, Effie and Daniel. I think you're both amazing. I'm so glad that we're friends with you and you shared some wisdom and some insight today. Thank you.
You guys are the best. Thanks for inviting us. I'm sure your audience will like all four of us to be together more often.
It was a pleasure. Thanks. It really was an honor. Thanks.
Well, Kyle, I don't know if I have much more to add. Effie and Daniel are so well-spoken and incredible in the way they present themselves and their perspectives. I'm so grateful that they're a part of today's episode.
I agree. I was thinking there's so much to life. There's so much to caregiving. And they do a great job of breaking it down to what really matters and relating to others to make sure that we all get through this together.
Well, we're going to wrap up this episode like we always do. We believe in the power of expressing gratitude. So Kyle and I share a thank you note at the end of every episode. However, today we invited our guests to join in on this expression. So Effie and Daniel also have a thank you note to share.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. I mean, basically, the whole silver lining in this experience are the people you meet, and I could name hundreds of them. But as I said earlier, when you are thrust into this space, you got to find your people. And then I didn't realize how much it would be a need again when you're not only living with a rare disease, but when we lost Lucas, he died 3 years ago. So now I'm a bereaved rare disease parent. You kind of have to find your people again. And it's a subset. It's not just the rare disease parents. It's the rare disease parents who have lost someone. So there I was and still am so grateful to Jennifer Seidman, who became sort of my guide through loss. And then later Al Friedman lost his son to SMA. And not only was he a dad, so that was a dynamic Jennifer and I didn't quite have in common, but Al and I did. But Al, of course, is a therapist, and you guys have had him on the show,
Yeah.
So his not just guidance, but companionship and wisdom. I mean, there's a number of them, but these are two people that I'm really grateful for.
Wonderful. Thank you.
This is so hard. And I'm also grateful for those people Daniel mentioned. And so freaking many more. But I think I'll just stay on topic because I was speaking about industry earlier. And I'd like to highlight Wendy Erler, who works at Alexion, because she does a patient engagement for Alexion / AstraZeneca. And when she asks me a question and when she interviews me for something or she's trying to get insight, she is one of the most active listeners and takes action after she gets feedback about stuff for our community. And it's one of her superpowers. And I'm so glad someone like her is in that position in a job like that, because she cares deeply for the rare disease community, and having all of the voices from the patient to the caregiver to the sibling all held together. And that holistic approach really comes from her heart. And I appreciate her so much. So thanks, Wendy.
Awesome. Kyle?
I wanted to give a note of gratitude to the concept of long-distance communication, or just communication in general. Like, think about the pandemic. And if we were not able to communicate, how tough that would be to not communicate and just be stuck in our own homes, in our own lives, like by ourselves. And so anyway, I'm just so thankful that we can communicate and relate to each other even though we're not in the same place.
My thank you note is going out to whoever found my phone and turned it in. I was nervous because, sure, there's a process and a system to recover lost and found, but all of it relies on whoever finds it first doing, you could call it the right thing. Turning it in, giving it to somebody, and then, of course, that somebody giving it to the next right somebody, and so on. So there was a part of me that thought, I'm never getting it back. But somebody found it, and everybody involved in the process just kept working it through the steps to get it back to the rightful owner, and I am grateful for that. We encourage you to visit our show notes at twodisabled.com for links to the work Effie and Daniel are both dedicated to. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with a friend, subscribe so you never miss an episode, and you all know what I'm going to say. Go write that review. What are you waiting for? We hope you enjoyed the Thanksgiving holiday coming up, and we look forward to talking with you again soon. Until next time, keep living with urgency.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.